that's one of the things that's really characteristic of working class jobs, I think, much more so than more intellectually complicated, abstract jobs. One of the things you have to be a good person to be around to do well at a working class job, because the jobs themselves are quite difficult. They're physically strenuous, they're demanding, and the payoff for that in part can be the camaraderie that emerges as a consequence of the shared enterprise, and that can make those jobs extremely worthwhile. You can make very, very good friends in a working class environment, and it's also very frequently the case that those working class environments are characterized by an extremely high level of sophisticated humor, is that they run on like derisive play. And it's one of the things I really liked about the restaurant is people are always playing tricks on each other and making jokes and, you know, and having a kind of dark fun, and everyone was participating in that. And it was certainly the case. I had a lot of working class jobs from the time I was 14 till the time I was about 25, I would say. And it was definitely the case that that ethos of harsh play. When I worked at this railway crew in northern Saskatchewan in the summer one year, and I was what the hell they call it, a peanut pounder. I think that was my job. I had this thing that looked like a lead tin can on the end of a stick, and I followed this machine that went down the tracks and laid down the plates that rails fit in, and there'd be a hole that was drilled into the plate, and then these things called peanuts held the plate in place so that someone come along and then spike the plate into place. And the guy in front of me would drop this little wooden dowel, which kind of looked like a peanut, hence the name, into the hole to hold the plate solid, and I would whack it with this lead can on the end of a stick, and that's what I did all day, was just this for like 16 hours out in the hot sun. And I did that for months, and it was an interesting place to begin working at. I write about this a bit in Beyond Order. I believe it's in Beyond Order, because there was an initiation ceremony that went along with the job. So when I first showed up on the crew, no one was particularly friendly. It was all men, and they were rough guys. Like a lot of them were native guys from Cree Indian guys from Saskatchewan. A lot of them had been in prison. They were rough guys, and they weren't that friendly if you were new, and they gave you a rough time. So everybody who came on board in the crew got a stupid nickname. Mine was Howdy Doody, which was this red-headed freckled puppet with big ears from the 1950s. And I asked one guy why he called me Howdy Doody, and he said, because you look nothing like him, which I thought was an extremely witty answer, you know, a very funny answer. And anyways, it was a bit of a derogatory nickname, and part of it was delivered to see if you had enough of a sense of humor to accept it without getting all, you know, narcissistically puffed up and irritable about it. And so it got shortened eventually to Howdy, which was a lot better because there was kind of a cowboy chic thing going on with that, and that was a lot better. And but there was this period where you got ribbed a lot, 2 weeks about, and if you didn't collapse under the weight of the teasing, then, and you did your damn job, and you know, you're reasonably entertaining to be around, then the doors opened and you were now part of the crew. There was one guy there, I wrote about him, Lunch Bucket was his name, that was his nickname, Lunch Bucket. He showed up on the crew with a lunch bucket, and that was a bad idea, because it was obvious that his mom had packed it, and you don't want to show up to a work crew of ex-cons with a lunch bucket that your mom packed. It's a bad look. And so he was called Lunch Bucket from day one, and he was a pretty touchy guy and pretty narcissistic, and people didn't like him very much, and he was tested a lot, and the testing started out with people just throwing pebbles at him. So the crew would stretch out about a quarter of a mile across the line as we were working on the tracks, and Lunch Bucket would be doing whatever job he had, and the game was to see if you could bounce a pebble off Lunch Bucket's helmet. And So he'd be working and these pebbles would be flying out of God only knows where because people didn't make it obvious. And, it was a score for your mates if you bounced a pebble off Lunchbucket's helmet. And he did not take to that well. And the pebbles got larger as the days progressed. And eventually he was driven off. And it was because he didn't subjugate himself properly to the multi-dimensional discipline of the crew, because he wasn't a good guy to have around. He couldn't take a ribbing. He didn't have a sense of humor. He wasn't able to contribute to the game that was being played socially. Well, these men were doing what was pretty tedious and difficult work. Like, we were literally out in the hot sun for 16 hours at a stretch, and it was rather mind-numbing work and somewhat physically demanding. The peanut pounding wasn't particularly difficult, but the spike pounding was, and you need some camaraderie in those positions so that your life is rendered maybe not just tolerable, but even enjoyable in principle. And so you're playing a multi-dimensional game, and if you're willing to subjugate yourself to that discipline, then you learn how to play that game, and if you get good at that, then that's a portable skill.
Will the lack of a red wave during the midterms lead to more reckless spending by a more emboldened administration, higher taxes, deeper inflation? If you're unsure how the next 2 years will unfold, talk to Birch Gold Group about protecting your savings with gold. Birch Gold makes it easy to convert your IRA or 401k into an IRA in precious metals, so you can own gold and silver in a tax-sheltered account. Here's what you need to do. Text Jordan to 989898 to claim your free info kit on gold. Then talk to one of their precious metal specialists. They will hold your hand through the entire process. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of happy customers, and almost 20 years of experience converting IRAs and 401ks into precious metals IRAs, Birch Gold can help you protect your savings too. Text Jordan to 989898 and protect yourself with gold today. That's Jordan to 989898.
And so you might ask yourself, well, what are you doing when you work as hard as you possibly can on at least one thing? Is that you're molding yourself into someone who can aim at something and move forward with efficiency and skill. And maybe if you're doing that extraordinarily well, you're not only molding yourself into someone who can aim at something and move towards it with efficiency and skill, but you can do that at the same time that you're helping other people around you do that, right? So you can think about this. Imagine you're a good athlete on a team, and you might say, well, what does it mean to be a good athlete? And you might say, well, I'm a soccer player, a football player, and I'm great I'm a top scorer. And you might say, well, that's enough to make you a great athlete. And the truth is, that's actually not enough to make you a great athlete, because you need to have the skill, whatever the skill might be. And high-level skill is, of course, extremely desirable in relationship to the goal. But you also have to be a good, let's say, a good sport. And that's a rather trivial description for something that's actually quite a profound moral accomplishment. So if you're not only a highly skilled athlete in the technical sense, but you're a good sport, it means that while you practice your skill, whatever that is, you also elevate the ability of all your teammates to make their skill manifest and also to improve their skill. And you do that simultaneously, right? And that's a high level of athletic ethos, is you're a good athlete and you're a good team player, and the union of those two things might make you something approximating a good person. And that's transportable. I think part of the reason that we admire sports heroes, when they're sports heroes in the truest sense, is because if they are ritual models of emulation in relationship to the development of high-level skill, and they're also admirable team players in the highest sense, then they actually are something approximating admirable citizens in the truest sense. And that pattern of skilled, productive, generous cooperation is actually a model that you can extract out of multiple games, and it's a good model to emulate. And that's something that isn't arbitrary, by the way. And so that also answers a question that I posed earlier in relationship to nihilism and belief. It's like, well, what should be foundational? And the answer might be something like practice in developing the capacity for skilled movement forward in a manner that simultaneously encourages the others that you're cooperating with to do precisely the same thing. And that's not some arbitrary ethos. It's not arbitrary, because if that doesn't happen, then nothing flourishes. And if it does happen, then everything flourishes. And it's also not relativistic in some sense, because you have to do that no matter what you're doing. No matter what it is that you're doing, if you do that well, you're doing whatever it is you're doing well. In fact, that's really in some sense how you would define well. And you know that's true. You know, you'll be at home and maybe you get a plumber to come over, or an electrician, somebody who's skilled in the working class technical sense, and they do a good job, and that's a great relief, especially, let's say, if it's a plumbing problem, because you really need your plumbing fixed. It's not optional. Well, you know what the options are. They're not great. And so it's really important to be a good plumber. And then you think, well, what makes a good plumber? And one is obviously technical skill. The man or the woman, generally the man when it's plumbing, knows what he's doing, and he does it efficiently. But that isn't all. If he's a really good plumber, well, he tells you what he's going to do, so he can communicate what he's going to do. He can tell you, he can identify the problem. So he's a good diagnostician. He can tell you what he's going to do. He can tell you how much what he's going to do will cost you. Then he does it, that's what it costs, right? So there's an honesty in interpersonal transaction that goes along with the diagnostic accuracy and the skill, and that's reflective of a very deep ethical orientation. And so to be a really good plumber, then you have to be highly skilled, but you have to be a clear and honest communicator, and you have to play fair in the most fundamental sense. And then you might say imagine he has some employees with him, and you might also, maybe you're deciding if you want to have the plumber come back if you have problems in the future, and so one of the things you're going to do is check out how he interacts with his subordinates, and if he's someone who's teaching them, because you can watch that, and doing that in a fair manner, and not talking down to them, and not manipulating them, and not tyrannizing over them, and is also able to do that in a manner that's sort of civilized, so that you don't feel like it's an imposition to have them in your house, because there's no psychological tension, surrounding the enterprise. Then you think, well, he's a good boss, and he's done a really credible job, and he's very honest and reliable, and he solved the problem, and he did it on time, and he didn't charge you any more than he had told you he would charge you, and it was a fair price. Like, that's pretty multi-dimensional space to manage simultaneously, right? That's a very sophisticated mode of ethical conduct. It can't be just reduced to being a good plumber in the technical sense. It's being a good person who happens to be a plumber, and that is success in a microcosm that is truly reflective of society at a much broader level. And it's definitely the case. I think this is absolutely clear that the integrity of our society depends in no small part on the minority of people, and often working class people, who do that sort of thing exceptionally well, right? They're the people who they build everything and they keep everything going.